Hey everybody, my name is Alec and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, just a few standard show things to get out of the way. First, please excuse the noise. It is the middle of what I like to refer to as basting season, which basically means that the entire East Coast is being first coated in water and then steamed. We're a Thanksgiving feast. It's insane. So, what you're hearing is my AC going because I have it pretty high up, and if I don't keep the temperature down, I will die. So just use that for now. The second thing I want to offer up is if you are going to be at Anime NYC, look out for me. I will be running around with a camera and a press badge because I am going back for, I want to say, the third or fourth year in a row. I gotta look at my badge wall. I've got a badge wall in my studio that has all the badges of all the cons I've gone to that I reasonably kept, which is a bunch of them, and I need to figure out what the earliest year is. But I think this is gonna be my third year. It's gonna be my fourth or fifth year going, and my third year, I think, as press. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've been keeping an eye out for all the emails, so hopefully I will get some cool interviews for you guys, because that's part of the reason I go as press to things, obviously. But thank you so much to the Anime NYC and Left Field Media team for having me back, as always, because it is super not guaranteed, or at least it shouldn't be. But on that note, the last thing I want to say is if you like this show, be sure to subscribe wherever you're getting it. Whether that be on YouTube if you're watching it, or your favorite podcast app of choice. It really helps the show. And if you absolutely love the show, be sure to hit the like button while you're down there hitting the subscribe button. It helps boost the ratings of the YouTube channel and the episode. But also be sure to leave a 5-star review if you're listening to the show on your favorite podcast platform. If you absolutely can't get enough of the show, you want more from me, you can do that by going over to bento-box.ghost.io. I haven't published anything there in a while at this point. I'm still figuring out exactly what I want to do with it. But if you're looking for my write-ups on anime when it happens in just a little over a month from now, that I do daily write-ups there, and if I have an interview that I can't film or record in some way, that's where I post the write-ups. That's my place for posting my written thoughts about anime and anime-related cultural things. So definitely go check that out. There's some fun stuff up there. And without further ado, let's jump into what we're talking about today, and that is inspired by something that's coming out that's being readapted for the first real time. And that thing is the new Ghost in the Shell, so I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the old Ghost in the Shell stuff. So I don't think I'm actually going to put in here to do a rough thing, because I'm going to be covering a lot of different things, from the movie to the TV show, to the 2 TV shows, to the other movies, maybe even a little bit of a live-action movie, which is a really weird thing. Just about the only thing I won't be covering is the games, because I've never talked about them. But on that note, let's jump into it with a conversation about Ghost in the Shell. Now, the thing that is probably going to hit a lot of people really weird, and I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to really focus on, because there's only 2 episodes out as of me talking about this, as of me doing this episode right now, but the thing's going to hit, I can guarantee you, a lot of people really weird about the new Ghost in the Shell thing, which is important enough that it has gone wide enough that people you probably don't expect have heard about it at this point. Is that the thing that's happening with the new Science Sorrow thing is they are trying to make a more faithful adaptation of the original Ghost in the Shell manga by Masamune Shirow. You're wondering what other stuff he's done. He's done, the most recent thing he's done, I believe he did Pandora and the Crimson Shell Ghost Urn. He also did Appleseed, famously, a couple other things, but those 2 in Ghost in the Shell are probably the things you may have heard of the most. Suffice to say, he's a big mangaka and artist in the cyberpunk space, and a lot of what he's done has been foundational for what cyberpunk is. you think that Cyberpunk 2077 is cool, it only exists because Ghost in the Shell exists. Because of an interesting combination of Ghost in the Shell, era, William Gibson stuff, and Snow Crash. All like that, all mixes together to become the modern foundation of what cyberpunk is. But the thing that happened with the adaptation of the movie, and actually I'm glad I got to the second episode of the newer show here because they just got into the Puppet Master arc in the movie, in the new show, which is we saw the garbage truck scene in episode 2 of The Ghost in the Shell, the 2026 one. Because they're calling it The Ghost in the Shell, because it has to be esoteric and weird and hard to deal with, of course. But it's really interesting because I watched the first movie for the first time in a while. I've seen it, I want to say, approaching at least 10 times. Because it is a seminal, and I have a poster wall in my studio that I'm actually staring at right now, and one of the posters I have is the original Ghost in the Shell poster with Motoko sitting two-legged on the floor and all the wires coming out of her back. This is one of my favorite properties for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into why as part of this, I'm sure. But the interesting thing about the Ghost in the Shell thing is every iteration has gotten closer to the manga in some ways. If you look at the original 1989 motion picture, it is really self-serious and really dour and really moody, with very few jokey moments. And even more than that, it's really dour and really... The camera, the lens of who that film focuses on is really narrow. You don't really see many people from outside of Section 9 in a real meaningful way, with the exception of the garbage truck scene, when the guy comes down with a trash bag and missed the garbage truck. That and chasing the guy who is being puppeted by the puppet master through the daytime market. It's really the most you see of the wider world, other than the set pieces that they have scenes in. There's not a whole lot of people outside of the main cast in that show, in that film. And then you pull out to... We'll deal with Innocence in a minute. Innocence we're going to push to the side for a minute. Then you pull out to Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. And the cast gets much bigger, and you're spending more time with the characters, because it's a full 2-season, 26-episode season show, and it's like... I talk about this all the time on this podcast and just in general, but the more time you have to fill, the more you just do as a consequence of trying to fill the time. A perfect example of any long-running shonen show, you start to know really weird, specific, granular parts of the world that you wouldn't know in a shorter show. And a perfect way to demonstrate this is... And even smaller scale shonen show, something like Ayakashi, that thing, for the fact that it's 52 episodes, spends a lot of that 52 episodes massively expanding the world as soon as it can figure out how. Because it's part of the project of especially Shonen Jump, but shonen action stuff in general. So what were certainly dimensional characters in the Ghost in the Shell original film had to be necessarily fleshed out in a meaningful way to be able to support the multiple arcs and multiple episodes of a full show in standalone complex. And they did this in some ways by making it goofier. By making specifically Batou way goofier. Batou is like a dad joke factory in Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. But you still have the Major, who is certainly much more lighthearted in all the standalone complexes, but she still has this dour, self-serious thing to her. She's not a full cartoon character. And then you get to... Actually, here's what I want to talk about Innocence, actually, here. Because I think talking about Innocence here is really important. Innocence as a film, I don't think is super successful for a couple reasons. First, I think it's really obtuse and overly self-serious. I think that Mamoru Oshii, in his original film, wanted to inject a sense of seriousness into Masamune Shirow's work that is there at times, but is there in the plot and the arcs of the Ghost in the Shell manga, but isn't necessarily there for the characters. The characters are, in Masamune Shirow's original manga, feel goofy because it's kind of a reflexive, first off, it's like an anime manga-ness that's just there, but also it feels reflexive. It feels how they deal with the fact they're seeing some absolute atrocities happen to people. In Standalone Complex, they, spoilers for all Ghost in the Shell stuff, including the 2 episodes of the new thing that are out, by the way. That's the only way I can get through this, so you've been warned. But in the Laughing Man saga, it's revealed that part of the reason Laughing Man went out into the world and started being the Laughing Man is because he was trying to expose, I think it's Serrano Genomics, for going ahead with cyberbrain adaptation on young people, even though some alarming, bigger than single digits, alarming amount of those young people were experiencing what they call adolescent cyberbrain hardening syndrome, which basically means that they would get their consciousness uploaded into their new cyberbrain and body, and their brain would effectively turn into concrete. It would effectively turn into a rock in their skull. There was also a thing about people being too adaptable to cyberbrains and becoming these weird data heads that couldn't stop consuming or interacting with the net kind of thing. That's horrifying. Both of those are horrifying. You're essentially petrifying people's brains or turning them into weird drug addicts. That's a horrifying thing to have happen. In so much of the Ghost in the Shell universe, even in the original manga, you're looking at this thing and oh my god, this stuff is terrible. Stuff people do, the level of crime people are doing are not just political crimes, although a lot of that is linked in because of the way they position Section 9. But the knock-on effects are awful to real people. And some of the joking, when you're reading the original manga, the jokiness it lets the release pressure, the release valve off, and in the original film. So it is very self-serious, and it does deliver itself dead straight, without much, if any, humor. Once again, really the only meaningful humor in the film is it's a trash guy. It's a guy who misses the trash truck. It's like, well, weird, but it is self-serious. But it doesn't feel depressing. Oshii then went on to do things like Avalon and Skycrawlers and all these different things that were in between, in addition to doing Ghost in the Shell Innocence once they finally let him do it, because it took a while for him to be able to do it. There's like over a 10-year gap between the two. And by the time he gets to Ghost in the Shell Innocence, which is the second one, it's so turned the dial up on the depressionness of it so much that it goes past noir levels of self-seriousness and depressedness in a way that I think is not... It doesn't help it. It makes it a harder movie to watch. Don't get me wrong. It's not like you're watching an original Evangelion movie that actively hates you. Tells you you're a disgusting monster from second zero, basically, in the original Eva movie. But it is... You are watching... You're not... the key point in that second movie, you're not really watching Motoko ever. She does show up towards the end, but you're actually watching Batou, and you're watching Batou kind of struggle through this case that is maximally depressing and maximally upsetting and all of these things. And it feels just so much more noir and spooky and, once again, I keep using this phrase because it's really true, depressing than the original movie did. I'm saying something, because the original movie is... I wouldn't call the original movie depressing, I'd call it deeply self-serious. And that's interesting because the Second Gig TV show, the standalone complex TV show, does take it in a much more lighthearted direction, once again, because you're dealing with the character for a longer time. But when it dives into stuff that's really self-serious, it can be really self-serious, and at any point in both the first and second seasons. And it lets the characters feel more complete. And in doing that with Standalone Complex, it also gives you the opportunity to see more of the characters than you did in the original film. So in the original film, the idea that Togusa is a family man is just a passing line. And Motoko says it to him as, this is why we hired you, this is why you're here. And it's an important thing, but once again, it's just a passing line. In the show, you meet his wife. They have a young child. There are moments when he is with his wife that helps him in whatever case or arc he's working on. And as he's moving through the world, it gives the consequences that happen to him more significance because you've seen his family. You see, they spend more episodes with Batou. They spend more episodes with all the characters, and you see all the characters for longer, so it feels less. They feel less one note. You get to know more of the strike team, so to speak, and even you spend more time with Aramaki. And you feel what you ultimately super feel with even the first 2 episodes of this new show. You feel the influence of the original source material, the manga, working its way back into the show. And then they take 2 giant steps backwards. And one of those steps is... I'm sorry, I gotta go grab something, so I'm gonna cut it here for 5. Sorry about that, I need to grab my phone so I could look up the name of the show I was thinking of, which the first of those that I'm going to call it here, although it's not the first chronologically. I'm not covering any of these things chronologically here. Is Ghost in the Shell Arise. So Ghost in the Shell Arise is an attempt to soft reboot Ghost in the Shell from base principles, because the thing that is true of all the Ghost in the Shell stuff is all derived from the original manga. And the storylines in the original manga make it into standalone complex, which is the first place when you really have an exploration of Motoko's backstory. In the original Ghost in the Shell film, you get a lot of Motoko because she's the main character, obviously, but you don't get her backstory. She's kind of this impenetrable black box of a person on some level. And in Ghost in the Shell, in standalone complex, she feels way more human. You see so much more humanness out of her. You see her playfully jab at people. You see the first demonstration that she's a full person. In the original film, for as much as Motoko is just naked for the first parts of that movie, it doesn't feel sexy, if that makes any sense. Like, it doesn't feel like that's a chosen act. It feels like it's a perfunctory thing that she does for the job. And I know if you haven't seen the movie, you're like, what do you mean she's naked for the job, but she's a cyber cop? Watch the movie. I don't know how to tell you, watch the movie. You'll see if you're like, oh, that's weird, but I get it. In Standalone Complex, she gets to be this full-rounded character of somebody who gets hyper-confident and super capable, but also she has been with her team for a really long time and knows them really well, and they all know her really well. And it shows. She's like, they all have these particularly, and I think it's the 4th episode, where they have to chase down a spider tank that's had somebody's cyberbrain implanted in it after their body expired. There's a moment when they're all having this emotional response to the fact that this guy just wanted to go see his parents one more time. And they all thought that he was going to kill his parents, but he was just going to say, like, hey Mom, I'm gonna be okay. And Ghost in the Shell Arise pulls that really far back. Actually, it pulls it even more far back than the live-action film, which we'll get to after Arise. But Ghost in the Shell Arise tries to make this cloak-and-dagger restart of the show that doesn't quite, of the property as a show, that doesn't quite work. Which is why it probably didn't get any more than the kind of original first arc that it got. Because it doesn't have the same feel as anything else in the Ghost in the Shell universe. It's interesting, it's a good time, but it's not quite in the same place as something like Second Gig or even Innocence is. And also it massively de-ages Motoko, so weird all-knowingness and tactical geniusness feels more out of place. Because the thing that's true in every iteration of the manga, any of the anime iterations, including the one that's coming out now, is that she has this incredible competence and awareness of how to do it right that is undeniable in some real meaningful ways. And in Ghost in the Shell Arise, they're trying to take it far enough back where you're seeing her before that was fully formed, but because you have so much to the contrary, it just doesn't feel right. Like, the whole show has this moment where it just doesn't feel right. Including things like the character design, and the score for that show is actually pretty interesting, because it has this ethereal quality that actually feels like it led into the current Ghost in the Shell iteration that's coming out on Amazon. By the way, that show is coming out on Amazon Prime if you're wondering where to watch it, which I encourage you, if you have Prime, watch the show. It's wildly good. And then we have the live-action film. The live-action film is this bucket of trouble. Because I remember at the time everybody was really ticked off at the casting. Not even the trailer, but the casting of the film. To the degree that I would bet the film was rewritten to address it at the very end of the film. Which is an insane choice. And if you've seen the live-action Ghost in the Shell, you know that, once again, spoilers for all the Ghost in the Shell things everywhere. But by the end of the film, you find out that Major Mary Killian's original real name was Motoko Kusanagi. And when she was not a full-body cyborg, she was a Japanese lady, not Scarlett Johansson. It's an insane choice. It's fully an insane choice. But in practice, and I've said this before, I totally understand the casting of Scarlett Johansson. I don't think, is it effectively whitewashing in a way? Yes. Without a doubt. Is it choosing star power over acting prowess? Probably yes, without a doubt. But in the casting director and everybody's defense, between several movies, between Under the Skin, which actually I haven't seen, but I bet I'm right about this, Lucy, and her, actually I'm going to add a fourth one to that, and playing Black Widow as an Avenger, between those four movies, she has demonstrated the ability to play the character of Motoko Kusanagi. Because Motoko Kusanagi, effects of Motoko Kusanagi are very much, has a commanding presence wherever she is, are very much in all of those characters in very specific ways. And I can look at Scarlett Johansson's work as an actress and see that she has a character like Motoko Kusanagi is fully in her range. So I understand that. I also understand, and it's very apparent from watching the live-action film, is that they knew they were only going to get one chance with this. And I think they've said this. They knew they were only going to get one shot at making a live-action Ghost in the Shell thing. They probably also understood that they would almost certainly never get a second and absolutely never get a third movie out of this. This movie was not made with the understanding that it will be a franchise, I would assume. Only what that does to the film is it becomes this clip show. And I know this because on not even my previous podcast, but one of my very original podcasts, I talked about this with my cousin Danny. Hi, Danny. But he was so perplexed by this movie. He's like, Alex, you made me watch this thing, and I barely understood it. It feels like I'm watching something that's super over my head. And I pause, I'm like, here's why that is. You haven't seen all of the Ghost in the Shell things up until this point, because the live-action film is essentially a fancy clip show. It is throw all the Ghost in the Shell stuff in a blender and mix it together to give the fans of the franchise, because at this point it was a full franchise, not just two films, this idea of you get to see this scene in live action. You get to see Kuze in live action. You get to see Motoko. You get to see all your friends are back kind of thing. And compare that to what is probably the better idea of a film, which is Solid State Society, which is the Ghost in the Shell film that goes alongside the standalone complex, Ghost in the Shell thing. And Solid State Society comes up with a really original premise. I believe it takes after both seasons of Ghost in the Shell are over, because Motoko is notably missing. And it's a weird rule that at the end of a lot of Ghost in the Shell stuff, Motoko just vanishes, disappears for a while, which I always find bizarre and funny. Because, we're done here, I'm going to go off and do my own weird thing for a while, and you're not going to hear from me until you hear from me again. But the idea behind that film is basically that an algorithm has automated the state without anybody's knowledge, and it's causing kids to technically die when they're really just being disappeared into the wills of old people. It's very weird. But that is, in doing that, it's an original plot line, and it's an original case for everyone to focus on, and it benefits from that. In the live-action film, once again, it's a mix of everything. They use Kuze as the main bad guy, but he feels like the puppet master. He also feels a little bit like the laughing man. Like I said, it becomes this weird clip show of like, oh, I know that part, I know this part. They show her sitting in front of the window. They show her hooked up to all the wires, like Melfina briefcase style. They show, once again, the live-action film becomes this weird clip show of a thing. And actually, so much so that the most interesting part of the live-action film is the behind-the-scenes footage and the production footage. And interestingly enough, promotional stuff that they shot with Scarlett Johansson, because despite what lots of people think, Scarlett Johansson, it was this weird feeling that Scarlett Johansson might be happier if she wasn't pegged as being so attractive, if she wasn't such as the object of desire and objectability. I don't know if I'm using the right word there. Because you hear her talk about acting and the projects she takes part in, including the Ghost in the Shell movie, and it feel her passion for it. She's really into it. And she also regularly she took the Avengers, but she also took Lucy. She also took Under the Skin. She takes these projects that are like, you don't take those projects if you're not into the project of acting. And she does what she can with the character of Motoko as laid out by the Ghost in the Shell stuff that's existed in animation up until then. But she just doesn't have the presence. The way that all the characters describe Motoko in all the Ghost in the Shell stuff is as basically a gorilla woman. It's this like woman who is, yes, very womanly and can be very soft, but that had never been but that is a thing she deploys at her will, and when she's not deploying it, she's like this big hard wall to beat the brakes off you at a moment's notice. And she's always capable of it. Like that one of the few times when Batou brutally picks at her just a little bit too much, she immediately hacks his cyberbrain and makes him punch his own lights out in Standalone Complex. That's true in the original film. She is like, once again, she spends a lot of time naked, but none of it feels sexy. It feels utilitarian. It's a weird thing to think about utilitarian nudity. He feels the most in command of anyone in that film. And even in the manga and in the current adaptation from Science Sorrow, she feels the most in command. And the show, the thing benefits from, the property benefits from it being animated. Because, as I'm sure anybody watching this knows by now, if you've been watching any form of animation enough, part of the reason you do things in animation is because you can't do them as effectively or as easily in live action. And you need to have such unshakable, like, railrod standing straight up with the broadest shoulders you can figure out how to get. Confidence to click something that comes close to what Motoko is in the Ghost in the Shell world. And to such a degree that you might not be able to act your way out of it unless you have such understanding of what body language you're putting off and at what angle you're putting it off at. Because so much of what kind of undercuts Scarlett Johansson is just not, it's just physically not a huge presence in the world in the way that Motoko feels like she is. And camera angles they do in that movie don't help that. I'm not sure what kind of direction she got, but it also didn't necessarily help that. But The other thing about Motoko that's very true is they don't even touch with a 10-foot pole in the original film or in Innocence. So they touch on briefly and interestingly in early parts of Standalone Complex, and they dive into head first by episode 2 in the newest iteration on Prime from Science Sorrow. It's that Motoko isn't straight. She just isn't. I don't even think that. I think her sexuality is whatever she wants it to be, and it just happens to aim towards women. I don't think I'm off base there. She makes playful stabs at male characters, including an underage one, mostly to prove a point in Standalone Complex. But in the original film, she's a sexless thing, and in the live action film, she also feels pretty sexless. And once again, the best part of Ghost in the Shell as an original source material is that characters are incredibly competent and incredibly skillful, but they also get to be quirky and weird and very human in a way that just doesn't come through in the original film. And comes through ultimately a shit ton more, but on a way less goofy scale than Masamune Shirow's original work in Standalone Complex. And then once again, super stumbles when it comes to the last 2 entries there, which are Ghost in the Shell Rise, which is self-serious to a fault, and the live-action movie, which has a lot of the same problem, although it does have one hilarious, cheeky joke of Batou getting his iconic eyes within the first third of the film. And he just said something to a character. He said something to the Major. I can see even better than I did when I was a human in this. And she just holds up a middle finger. She goes, "How many fingers am I holding up?" He's like, very funny. And that's like the most jokey I remember the live action film getting. And if you had just a little bit more in there, it'd probably do it a little bit better. I don't know where you would fit it in, because once again, that thing feels like a clip show. But I feel like you could have given it a little bit more of that. It would have felt more like the thing it actually is than the thing that the original film tried to make it into. If there's a perfect blend of Oshii's Ghost in the Shell and Shirow's Ghost in the Shell, I would probably call it the Standalone Complex series. And I think a lot of that is because it ran for 54 episodes. I'm probably doing that math wrong, but it ran for 2 26-episode seasons. So it's just like that amount of time meant that you had to give those characters space to be much more significantly rounded than you do when Batou is a very relegated side character in the original film. You have to give him space to be significantly more human in Standalone Complex, if for no other reason than he's just on screen more. Saito, Pazu, Ichikawa. There's a great scene with Ichikawa where in order to hide out, he goes and hides out in a pachinko parlor for, I think, 2 days. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this was because I was so struck by the differing in tone and differing in presentation of the new Ghost in the Shell, which once it's over I will absolutely talk about here. But that'll take, obviously, the whole summer season, and then Bob's Your Uncle. That as soon as I saw the second episode, as soon as I saw the first episode, I'm like, oh, this is going to hit people weird. Because there are tons of people who their primary understanding of Ghost in the Shell is in animated form. And it had never been goofy in this way in animated form. It has always been this goofy in the original manga. But it just isn't in the animated thing. So I wanted to make an episode where I could talk about the broader whole thing that is Ghost in the Shell previous to the kind of direct from manga adaptation that Science Sorrow is doing now. And on that note, that's actually where I'm gonna leave. Oh, yeah. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you like the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.